I never thought that after 4 decades of marriage, I'd be sitting in the driver's seat of a 1967 Shelby GT500 Mustang, feeling the rumble of that V8 engine beneath me as I headed toward a new life. That car, worth more than some people's homes, was just one of 7 vintage beauties I took with me when I left. Robert always said I didn't appreciate his collection. Turns out, I appreciated it more than he ever knew. Before we jump back, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The day I discovered my husband's affair wasn't dramatic. There was no lipstick on a collar, no mysterious phone call in the night. Instead, it was a simple notification on my iPad, the one Robert insisted I use to stay current with technology. I had just finished the last of my physical therapy exercises. 3 months earlier, I'd had both knees replaced after years of putting it off. Robert had discouraged the surgery, claiming someone needed to manage the house, but when his brother, Steve, fell ill with cancer, Robert couldn't argue anymore. I needed to be mobile enough to care for him. Steve had moved into our guest room 6 months ago. Terminal pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 3 months, but he was fighting hard. Robert couldn't handle the sight of his younger brother wasting away, so the caregiving fell to me. Not that I minded. Steve had always been kind to me, more so than his brother in recent years. That afternoon, as Steve napped, I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through social media when a photo appeared. Robert at some retreat in Sedona, his arm around a woman with caramel-colored hair twisted into a complicated braid, both of them in matching yoga poses on red rocks against a sunset. The caption read, "Finding balance with my guiding light. Blessed ear namaste." For a moment, I thought perhaps he'd mistakenly been tagged. Robert didn't do yoga. Robert complained about back pain if he had to bend to pick up the newspaper. Robert had told me he was at an insurance convention in Phoenix. I clicked on the woman's profile, Jennifer Parker, yoga instructor and spiritual awakening coach. Her feed was filled with impossible poses and inspirational quotes. And then more photos with Robert. Not just from this trip, but dating back 3 years. Hiking in Colorado. Kayaking on Lake Tahoe. A Christmas market in Chicago when he'd told me he was snowbound at an airport. Hard to believe that's the same Robert who needs me to massage his shoulders after he drives to the grocery store, a voice said behind me. I turned to find Steve leaning against the doorframe, looking gaunt, but with that spark of mischief still in his eyes. "You knew?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Not for certain," Steve sighed, easing himself into a chair. "But I suspected. He takes too many business trips for a man who complains about travel. And he's been—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Smug. Like he's getting away with something." I stared at the photo again. The woman was at least 15, years younger than me, with the taut skin and confident smile of someone who'd never had to compromise. I zoomed in on Robert's face. He looked relaxed, happy in a way I hadn't seen in years. When was the last time he'd looked at me that way? "What are you going to do, Ellie?" Steve asked gently. What indeed? I was 63 years old. I'd spent 42 years with Robert, married for 40 of them. I'd given up my promising career in architectural design to raise our children and support his insurance business. I'd been the one who kept the books in those early years, who entertained clients' wives, who stayed up late helping him prepare presentations. I was the one who drove Tom to hockey practice at 5 a.m. and sat through Becca's endless dance recitals. I was the one who cared for his parents in their final years, bathing his father after every stroke-induced accident, spending nights at his mother's bedside during her battle with dementia. And now I was nursing his brother while he did Downward Dog with Jennifer Parker. "I don't know," I answered honestly, setting down the iPad. "I really don't know." That evening, Robert called as he always did when traveling. He described boring meetings and stale conference room sandwiches. He complained, about the hotel bed hurting his back. He asked if I'd remembered to turn the sprinklers on for the lawn. "Steve's having a rough day," I said, which was true, though not in the way Robert would assume. "The hospice nurse thinks we should adjust his pain medication." "That's too bad," Robert said, distracted. I heard voices in the background, laughter. "Listen, I might have to stay an extra day. The regional VP wants to discuss expanding our territory." "That's fine," I said calmly. "Take all the time you need." After we hung up, I sat in Robert's study, surrounded by photos of his precious cars. The 1967 Shelby GT500, the 1963 split-window Corvette, the 1970 Dodge Challenger RT, the 1965 Jaguar E-Type, the 1957 Porsche Speedster, the 1969 Maserati Ghibli, and his newest acquisition, a 1971 Ferrari 365 GTS4 Daytona Spider, one of only 121 ever made. He'd paid over $27 million for it last year, draining a significant portion of our retirement account. When I'd expressed concern, he'd waved it off. "It's an investment, Ellie. It'll be worth double in 5 years." These cars lived in climate-controlled luxury in our detached 6-car garage. Robert spent every Saturday morning with them, lovingly, waxing their paint, checking their fluids, occasionally starting them up just to hear their engines. But he rarely drove them. "They're too valuable to risk on the road," he always said. I'd never fully understood his obsession. To me, they were just beautiful machines meant to be driven, not locked away. But Robert saw them as status symbols, as tangible proof of his success. I opened his desk drawer and found exactly what I expected: a folder labeled Car Documents. Inside were titles, insurance papers, maintenance records, and certificates of authenticity for each vehicle. All of them registered solely in Robert's name. Except they weren't. I frowned, looking closer at the ownership documents. Each car was registered to Robert Collins or Eleanor Collins, not and or. A small detail, but a significant legal one. Either of us could legally sell or transfer any of these vehicles without the other's signature. I remembered signing these papers years ago. Robert had explained it as a practical matter. In case something happens to me, you won't have to deal with probate. I'd thought nothing of it at the time, but now I wondered if it had been simple carelessness on his part. Robert had always assumed I had no interest in his precious collection. For the first time since seeing that photo, I smiled. The next morning, I called our family attorney, citing the need to update Steve's medical directives. But once in his office, I asked a very different question. "Martin, what exactly are my rights regarding jointly owned property in Pennsylvania?" Martin looked surprised, but explained the law carefully. In our case, with the cars titled with OR rather than and, either Robert or I could legally sell or transfer the vehicles independently, with no requirement for the other's consent. "Planning to sell one of Robert's babies?" Martin asked with a smile. "Just checking my options," I replied. When I returned home, I found Steve sitting in the sunroom, looking out at the garden I'd tended for decades. "Did you know," I said, sitting beside him, "that legally, I could sell Robert's entire car collection without his permission?" Steve's eyebrows shot up. "Well now, that's interesting. Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" "I don't know what I'm thinking yet," I admitted, "but I'm definitely thinking." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Robert and Jennifer in those matching yoga poses, her perfect braid, his contented smile. I thought about the drawer full of little trinkets he'd brought me from his business trips over the years, a coffee mug from Seattle, a refrigerator magnet from Denver, a snow globe from Chicago. Cheap souvenirs while he was spending lavishly on romantic getaways. I got up and walked to the garage, using the key Robert didn't know I had. I flipped on the lights, and 7 automotive masterpieces gleamed under the specialized lighting Robert had installed. I walked slowly past each one, running my fingers lightly over their perfect finishes. These cars represented millions of dollars, millions that could fund a completely new life. I thought about Tom and Becca, both now in their 30s. Tom worked in finance in New York, too busy to call more than once a month. Becca lived closer, teaching elementary school in Philadelphia, but she'd grown increasingly distant over the years, especially after Robert had refused to help with the down payment on her house, saying she needed to learn financial independence. This, just months after spending millions on the Ferrari. Would they blame me if I took these cars? Probably. They'd always sided with their father, viewing me as merely the support system that kept their lives running smoothly. When had that happened? When had I become invisible to my own children? My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Having dinner with the regional team. We'll call tomorrow. Make sure to give Steve his evening meds. I looked at the timestamp, 11:37 p.m. Regional team dinner at nearly midnight? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I checked the time in Sedona, 9:37 p.m. Still late for a business dinner, but at least plausible. He hadn't even bothered to account for the time difference in his lie. That was the moment something broke in me. Not with a dramatic snap, but with the quiet finality of ice cracking beneath your feet. One moment solid, the next giving way to cold, dark water. I walked back to the Shelby GT500, Robert's first acquisition, the car that had started his collection 25 years ago. I slid into the driver's seat, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The keys weren't in it, of course. Robert kept all the keys locked in a special cabinet. But I knew where the spare sets were hidden. Robert had shown me years ago, in case of emergency. I retrieved the Shelby's key from its hiding place, inserted it into the ignition, and turned. The engine roared to life, its vibration traveling up through the seat and into my bones. In that moment, I finally understood the appeal. This wasn't just a car. It was raw power harnessed in metal and leather. It was freedom. It was possibility. I turned off the engine and sat in silence, a plan forming in my mind. The next morning, I called Frank Wilson, a car collector Robert had often done business with. Frank had always been kind to me at car shows, explaining details Robert had assumed would go over my head. "Mrs. Collins? What a pleasant surprise," Frank answered. "How's Robert? Still babying that Daytona Spider?" "Robert's fine, Frank. But I'm calling about the collection. I'm considering selling some pieces." There was a pause. "All due respect. Mrs. Collins, but does Robert know you're calling me? He's never indicated any interest in selling." "Robert and I are making some changes," I said vaguely. "I'd appreciate your discretion, but yes, we're considering liquidating some assets. Would you be able to come by tomorrow to look at what we have?" Frank agreed, though I could hear the skepticism in his voice. Next, I called Martin again, asking him to prepare power of attorney documents for me to sign on Robert's behalf. He's traveling, and we need to handle some matters with Steve's care. Martin didn't question it. He'd seen me manage family affairs for decades. After that, I called a real estate agent about listing our house, just exploring options for downsizing, and a bank in Savannah, Georgia about opening new accounts. Why Savannah? I'd visited once years ago on a girls' trip and fallen in love with its genteel beauty, its historic squares lined with oak trees dripping Spanish moss. Robert had promised we'd go back together someday, but that day never came. While making these calls, I kept checking on Steve, ensuring his comfort. In the afternoon, hospice sent over a nurse to assess him. She adjusted his medications and spoke to me quietly in the hallway. "He's declining faster than we expected. Days, maybe a week at most." I nodded, fighting tears. Should I call his brother to come home? If he wants to say goodbye, yes, I would. I texted Robert. "Steve is declining rapidly. Hospice says days at most. You should come home. His response came 20 minutes later. Tied up in meetings. We'll try to wrap up and fly back tomorrow. Tomorrow. His brother was dying, and he'd try to make it back tomorrow. I showed the message to Steve, who gave a weak chuckle. Always the dedicated businessman, my brother. Don't worry, Ellie. I'm not offended. Robert's been running from death his whole life. I sat with Steve through the evening, holding his hand as he drifted in and out of sleep. In one lucid moment, he squeezed my fingers and said, "You know what you need to do, Ellie. Don't let guilt stop you. You've given enough." That night, Robert finally called. He sounded irritated, put upon. "I've booked a flight for tomorrow afternoon. I should be home by dinner." "Good," I said. "Steve will be glad to see you." "How bad is he really, Ellie? You're not exaggerating to get me to come home, are you?" The casual cruelty of the question stole my breath. "Your brother is dying, Robert, right now, in our guest room, while you're on vacation with your yoga instructor." Silence stretched between us, then, "What are you talking about?" "Jennifer Parker, Sedona, the spiritual retreat. Please don't insult me by continuing to lie." Another long pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, become defensive, harder. "It's not what you think, Ellie. Jennifer is a wellness coach. She's helping me with some stress management techniques. It's professional." "Professional," I repeated flatly. "And all those other trips over the last 3 years? Also professional? You've been spying on me?" Now he sounded outraged. "No, Robert, you posted photos publicly. You just didn't think I'd ever see them. This is ridiculous. I'm not having this conversation over the phone. We'll talk when I get home." "Yes," I agreed. "We certainly will." After he hung up, I walked again to the garage. This time, I didn't just look at the cars. I photographed each one, inside and out. I documented every detail, every scratch, though there were precious few, every feature. Then I went back inside and emailed the photos to Frank Wilson with the subject line, "Preview for tomorrow's discussion." In the morning, Steve was weaker. The hospice nurse came again, adjusting his medication to keep him comfortable. I sat with him, reading aloud from his favorite novel, occasionally pausing when his breathing became too labored. "You're a good woman, Ellie," he whispered during one such pause. "Too good for my brother. Always were." I squeezed his hand gently. "Rest now. Save your strength for when Robert gets here." But we both knew Robert might not make it in time. Frank Wilson arrived at 2 p.m., looking uncomfortable but professionally curious. I led him to the garage, where his discomfort quickly gave way to excitement as he examined each vehicle. "They're all in incredible condition," he marveled, running his hand along the Ferrari's flank. "Museum quality. What exactly are you looking to do here, Mrs. Collins?" "I need a valuation on each car, and information on the quickest way to liquidate them if necessary." Frank looked troubled. "Mrs. Collins, Ellie, I have to ask again. Does Robert know about this? Because selling a collection like this without the owner's knowledge would be—" He trailed off, searching for a diplomatic word. "The cars are titled in both our names," I said, showing him the documentation. "I have every legal right to sell them if I choose." Frank studied the papers, then nodded slowly. "That's true, but it's highly unusual. These cars are Robert's passion. Everyone in the collector community knows that." "Things change, Frank. People change." I met his gaze steadily. "Now, about that valuation?" He agreed to prepare a detailed report and send it to me by the end of the day. He also mentioned several interested buyers he could contact immediately if I decided to sell. "These aren't just any cars," he explained. "They're blue-chip investments. Even in a hurry, you'd get close to market value." As Frank was leaving, the hospice nurse called me urgently. I rushed to Steve's room, where his breathing had become shallow and irregular. "It won't be long. Now," she said quietly. I sat beside him, holding his hand, tears streaming down my face. This gentle man who had shown me more kindness than his brother ever had was slipping away. "I called Robert again," I told him. "His flight lands at 4:30. He should be here by 6 daum." Steve's eyes fluttered open briefly. "Don't wait for him. Ellie," he whispered. "Don't waste any more time waiting." Those were his last coherent words. At 3:47 p.m., while I was still holding his hand, Steve took his final breath. I sat there for a long time, let the grief wash over me. Not just grief for Steve, but for the years I'd spent with a man who couldn't be bothered to come home for his dying brother. The hospice nurse helped me make the necessary calls. While we were waiting for the funeral home to arrive, my phone chimed with an email from Frank, the valuation report. The collection was worth just over $5, $8 million, nearly $6 million, a fortune that could give me a completely new start. At 5:45 p.m., I heard Robert's key in the front door. He called out as he entered, his voice echoing through the quiet house. "Ellie? Steve?" I met him in the foyer. "You're too late. He's gone." Robert's face crumpled, whether in genuine grief or just the recognition that he'd failed at something important, I couldn't tell. "Why didn't you call me? I would have taken an earlier flight." "I did call you. I texted you. You were busy." He brushed past me toward the guest room, where the funeral home staff were preparing to transport Steve's body. I let him go, giving him space for his grief, real or performative. When he returned, his eyes were red but dry. "I need a drink," he muttered, heading for his study. I followed him, watching as he poured himself a generous scotch. He didn't offer me one. "We need to talk, Robert." He sighed heavily, collapsing into his leather chair. "Not now, Ellie. My brother just died." "Yes, now, because I just spent months caring for your brother while you were off doing yoga in Sedona with Jennifer Parker." He flinched at the name, then rallied. "I told you that was professional, right?" I crossed my arms. "Just like Chicago was professional, and Lake Tahoe, and Monterey." He stared at me, calculation replacing grief in his eyes. "You've been going through my things." "No, Robert. I've been looking at public photos that you posted, thinking I'd never see them. Photos of you with the same woman, over and over, in places you told me were business trips." "She's a friend, a colleague." "Stop lying!" My voice rose, surprising both of us. In 40 years, I had rarely raised my voice to Robert. "I know, Robert. I know about the affair, about Jennifer, about all of it." He was silent for a long moment, considering his options. Finally, he sighed. "Fine. Yes, Jennifer and I have been seeing each other. But it's not what you think. It's not some tawdry affair. We have a connection, Ellie. A spiritual connection. She understands parts of me that you never could." The calm way he said it, as if he were explaining something perfectly reasonable to a slightly dim child, made my blood boil. "How long?" I demanded. 3 years, but we've known each other longer. She was a client first." 3 years, I repeated. "While I was here, running your house, caring for your family." He had the grace to look slightly ashamed, but rallied quickly. "Look, I never meant to hurt you. You and I, we've had a good run. But we've grown apart. You have to admit that. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time we connected on any meaningful level?" "Probably around the time you started sleeping with your yoga instructor," I replied coldly. He winced. "That's crude, Ellie. Jennifer is much more than that. She's a spiritual guide, a healer." "And now what? You want a divorce so you can go pose on more red rocks with her?" Robert leaned forward, setting down his scotch. "Actually, yes. I think a divorce would be best for everyone. We can do it amicably. Split everything down the middle. You keep the house, I'll take my cars and some personal items. We'll divide the financial accounts. Clean, simple. His callousness took my breath away. 40 years together, dismissed so easily. I see, I said finally. And then you and Jennifer can ride off into the sunset. I know this is a shock, he said, his tone softening into something that might have been meant as kindness, but came across as condescension. Take some time to process. We don't have to decide everything right now. That's very generous of you, Robert. He smiled, not catching my sarcasm. I'm glad you understand. Now I need to make some calls about Steve's funeral arrangements. Already taken care of, I said. While you were flying home. He nodded absently, already reaching for his phone. Good, good. I'm going to call the kids. Let them know about Steve. I left him to it, walking back to the guest room now empty of Steve's presence. The hospice nurse had helped me strip the bed, dispose of the medical supplies. All that remained were a few personal items, Steve's watch, his wallet, a dog-eared paperback. I picked up the watch, turning it over in my hands. The back was engraved, "To Steve, time is precious. Use it wisely. Mom and Dad, time is precious. Use it wisely." I thought about the time I'd given to Robert, 42 years, most of my life. And now he was ready to discard me for a woman who put her leg behind her head and talked about chakras. No, I wasn't going to let him off that easily. I pulled out my phone and opened the email from Frank Wilson. 5 cars valued at $5. $8 million, a fortune. My fortune. I called Frank. I've decided to sell, all of them except the Shelby, and I need it done quickly. How quickly? Frank asked, surprise evident in his voice. By tomorrow evening. Frank Wilson's voice carried a note of surprise. By tomorrow evening. Ellie, these aren't Honda Civics. Even with motivated buyers, paperwork alone typically takes... I understand the challenges, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. But I'm willing to accept reasonable offers below market value if it means completing the transactions quickly, and I'm prepared to pay whatever expediting fees are necessary. There was a pause, and I could almost hear Frank's mental calculations. I have a client in Dubai who's been after the Ferrari for over a year, and a collector in Seattle who'd take the Porsche site unseen. For the others, let me make some calls. Thank you, Frank. And one more thing. Discretion is paramount. I'd prefer Robert not know about this until everything is finalized. Understood, Frank replied, though hesitation lingered in his voice. I'll be in touch tomorrow morning with offers. After hanging up, I stood in the doorway of Steve's empty room, gathering my courage. From downstairs, I could hear Robert on the phone with Tom, his voice carrying that special tone of authority he reserved for important matters. I moved quietly to our bedroom and began packing a suitcase. Not everything, just enough for a few days. Enough time to execute my plan. I was zipping the suitcase when Robert appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of confusion and annoyance. What are you doing? Packing, I replied simply. I need some space to process everything. I'm going to stay at the Marriott, downtown for a few days. His brow furrowed. That's unnecessary, Ellie. This is your home. I'll sleep in the guest room if it makes you uncomfortable to share a bed right now. The guest room, where his brother had just died, where the sheets had barely been changed. How considerate, I said, unable to keep the edge from my voice. But I need space away from this house, away from you. Robert sighed dramatically, as if I were being unreasonable. Fine, if that's what you need, but we should talk about the funeral arrangements for Steve before you go. And the kids want to know if they should come home tonight or tomorrow. Tomorrow is fine. The funeral home can't schedule anything until Monday at the earliest. I lifted my suitcase from the I'll be back in time to help with the arrangements. Robert stepped aside to let me pass, but caught my arm gently as I moved by him. Ellie, I know this is a lot all at once. Steve's death, and then us. But I hope we can handle this like adults. No need to make things messy. I looked at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. The face I'd woken up to for 40 years. Once I'd thought it was the most handsome face I'd ever seen. Now I saw the calculation behind his eyes, the practiced sincerity in his expression. No, I agreed quietly. No need for mess. He released my arm, seemingly satisfied with my response. The kids will be relieved. They were worried you might take this badly. The casual way he said it, as if our children had already discussed and accepted the end of our marriage, sent a chill through me. You've already told them you want a divorce? Robert had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I may have mentioned that things between us have been strained, that we might be considering separate paths. I see. And how long have you been having these conversations with our children about our strained relationship? He shrugged, defensive now. It's not like that, Ellie. Tom called me a few months ago, concerned that you seemed distant on the phone. I just acknowledged that things haven't been the same between us for a while. My mind reeled. While I'd been caring for his dying brother, Robert had been laying groundwork with our children, subtly positioning me as the distant, disengaged one, creating a narrative where our inevitable divorce would be seen as mutual, perhaps even primarily my fault. How convenient, I murmured, brushing past him toward the stairs. He followed me down, his tone growing irritated. I don't understand why you're acting this way. Would you rather I had lied to them? Pretended everything was fine? I paused at the front door, suitcase in hand. No, Robert. I'd rather you had been honest with me. I'd rather you hadn't been deceiving all of us for years. Before he could respond, I walked out and closed the door firmly behind me. The Marriott downtown was exactly what I needed, anonymous, comfortable, and far enough from our neighborhood that I wouldn't run into anyone who knew us. I checked in, refusing the bellhop's offer to help with my single suitcase, and made my way to a room on the 14th floor with a view of the Pittsburgh skyline. Once alone, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed myself to fully feel the emotions I'd been controlling all day. Grief for Steve, anger at Robert, and beneath it all, a profound sense of betrayal that threatened to swallow me whole. I'd given Robert everything: my youth, my dreams, my unwavering support through each stage of his career. When had I become so disposable to him? When had he started looking at me and seeing only an obligation, a relic of a life he no longer wanted? My phone buzzed with a text from Becca. Just heard about Uncle Steve. So sorry, Mom. We'll be home tomorrow afternoon. Do you need anything? I stared at the message, wondering what exactly Robert had told her. Was she under the impression I'd fled the house in hysterics after learning about his affair? Or had he presented it as a mutual decision, two adults calmly agreeing to part ways? I'm fine, I texted back. Just taking some quiet time at a hotel tonight. See you tomorrow. Almost immediately, my phone rang. Becca calling. I hesitated, then answered. Mom, are you okay? Dad said you were upset and needed space. I chose my words carefully. It's been a difficult day. Steve passed, and then your father and I had a challenging conversation. About Jennifer? Becca asked, her voice small. The question hung in the air between us. So she knew. How long had she known? You knew about her? I asked quietly. Becca's sigh crackled through the phone. Not exactly. I mean, Dad never said anything directly. But last Christmas, when we were at that restaurant in Monterey, the waitress seemed to know him, called him Mr. Collins and friend, like they'd been there before. And then there were little things, the way he'd check his phone and smile, how he always seemed to have these business trips to the same places. My heart constricted. Why didn't you say anything? What was I supposed to say, Mom? Hey, I think Dad might be cheating on you? I didn't know for sure. I just suspected. And honestly, I kept hoping I was wrong. I closed my eyes, absorbing this new layer of hurt. My own daughter had noticed signs of her father's infidelity, but had kept silent, perhaps to protect me, perhaps to protect her relationship with him. I understand, I said finally. It's not your responsibility to police your father's behavior. Are you two getting divorced? She asked bluntly. Your father seems to think so. And what do you think? I considered the question. 24. Hours ago, divorce had never crossed my mind. Now it seemed inevitable. But on whose terms? I think, I said slowly, that 40 years of marriage deserves more than a casual dismissal. I think I deserve more than being discarded for a younger model once your father decided I'd served my purpose. Mom, Becca's voice was pained. I know Dad's being a jerk about this, but don't do anything rash, okay? You guys have built a life together. Maybe with some counseling. Becca, I interrupted gently, your father has been having an affair for 3 years. He's already made his choice. Now I need to make mine. After we hung up, I ordered room service, then opened my laptop. I had research to do. First, I logged into our joint accounts, taking screenshots of balances and recent transactions. Then I reviewed our investment portfolio, noting Robert's recent withdrawals, over $50,000 in the past 3 months alone. Yoga retreats weren't cheap, apparently. Next, I logged into Robert's email. He'd given me his password years ago when he needed help managing client communications during a hospital stay, and like many men his age, he'd never considered changing it. His inbox revealed dozens of exchanges with Jennifer, dating back years. I downloaded them all, stomach clenching, at the intimate language, the plans made, the lies coordinated. There were also emails with Tom and Becca from the past few months, subtly framing our marriage as troubled, positioning Robert as the reasonable one trying to make things work with an increasingly distant wife. One email to Tom particularly stood out. Your mother's dedication to Steve is admirable, but it's become an obsession. She barely acknowledges me anymore. It's like living with a stranger. Written while I was bathing his brother, administering medications, managing his pain, work Robert had deemed beneath him. I forwarded everything to a new email account I'd created, then deleted the sent items from Robert's outbox. He might never notice the digital footprints I'd left. By midnight, I had a clear picture of Robert's deception and a growing sense of my options. Frank would contact me in the morning about the cars. Martin, our attorney, believed I was preparing documents for Steve's care, not plotting my exit strategy. Robert thought I was simply taking space to process before inevitably accepting his terms for our divorce. They were all wrong. I wasn't running away. I was preparing for war. Morning brought a flurry of texts. Robert asking when I'd be home, Tom confirming his arrival time, Becca checking if I was okay. I responded to each with brief, non-committal messages, not wanting to give away my plans. At 9:15, Frank called. I've got buyers for all 4 cars, he announced without preamble. The Ferrari client is offering $4 million below market, but not insulting. The Corvette and Maserati can go to a collector in Chicago for $1. $1 million total. And I've got $7 million for the Porsche and Jaguar from a museum in Seattle. I did the quick math. $5, $2 million. Less than Frank's initial valuation, but still a life-changing sum. And they can all complete the transactions today? I asked. The Ferrari and the Porsche Jaguar deals, yes. The Chicago buyer needs until tomorrow morning. Is that acceptable? I considered the timeline. Robert would be busy with funeral arrangements and the kids today. By tomorrow, the plan would be in motion regardless. That works. What do you need from me? The titles and your signature on the transfer documents. I can bring everything to you this afternoon. I thought of the titles in Robert's desk. Would electronic signatures work? I can scan everything. For the initial agreements, yes, but you'll need to sign the originals before the transfers are complete. Understood. I'll go home and get everything ready. Can you meet me at 2 p.m.? Frank agreed, and I checked out of the hotel, my resolve hardening with each minute. The house was empty when I arrived. Robert had left a note saying he'd gone to the funeral home to make arrangements for Steve. Perfect. I went straight to his study, retrieved the titles from his desk drawer, and made high-quality scans of each. Then I replaced the originals exactly as I'd found them. While in his study, I noticed a leather portfolio on his desk, estate planning documents we'd prepared years ago. I flipped through them, confirming what I already suspected. In the event of either of our deaths, everything would go to the surviving spouse. If we were to divorce, our prenuptial agreement, insisted upon by Robert's parents, would give me a modest settlement, but leave the bulk of our assets, including his precious cars, with him. The prenup had seemed reasonable 40 years ago, when neither of us had much. Now it was a sword hanging over my head, unless I acted first. I scanned these documents as well, then headed to our bedroom to unpack my overnight bag. As I was hanging clothes in the closet, I noticed Robert's side looked unusually sparse. Several of his favorite suits were missing, along with his weekend, casual wear. I checked his dresser drawers, half empty. He'd been gradually moving things out, preparing for his new life while maintaining the facade of our marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. At funeral home. Meeting with Pastor at 1, can you be there? Kids arriving around 3. I replied that I'd meet him at the church, knowing I had no intention of doing so. My appointment with Frank was at 2, and that took priority. I spent the next hour gathering important documents, birth certificates, insurance policies, medical records, and scanning them. Then I carefully replaced everything, leaving no evidence of my activities. At 1:30, I headed to the garage to check on the cars. Each gleamed under the specialized lighting, immaculate as always. Robert had installed a sophisticated security system to protect his precious collection. Cameras, motion sensors, reinforced doors. I disabled it using the code he didn't know I knew. Then opened the small safe hidden behind a maintenance cabinet where he kept the spare keys. Inside were the keys to all 7 cars, each labeled and organized. I took the key to the Shelby GT500, slipping it into my pocket. The others I left in place. Soon they would belong to new owners anyway. Frank arrived precisely at 2 p.m., a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. We sat at the kitchen table as he spread out transfer agreements for each car. The buyers have signed their portions, he explained. Once you sign, the money will be transferred to the escrow accounts I've set up. After the vehicles are delivered and inspected, the funds will be released to whatever account you designate. I examined each document carefully, noting the sale. Prices matched what Frank had quoted. The buyer's banking information was included, as were detailed delivery instructions. How soon can the cars be picked up? I asked, signing where indicated. The Ferrari client has a transport company on standby. They can be here within 3 hours. The Seattle Museum is sending their team first thing tomorrow morning. The Chicago buyer's transport won't be available until tomorrow afternoon. Nodded, calculating. And the funds will clear how quickly? For these high-value transactions, we're using wire transfers. Once the vehicles pass inspection, the money moves immediately. Perfect. By this time tomorrow, I could be well on my way to my new life, the money safely beyond Robert's reach. As Frank gathered the signed documents, his expression grew serious. Ellie, I've known Robert for 15 years. He's going to be devastated when he realizes you've sold his collection. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want to do? I met his gaze steadily. Frank, My husband of 40 years has been carrying on an affair for the past 3. He's planning to divorce me and leave me with a fraction of what we've built together. And he couldn't even be bothered to come home in time for his brother's death. So yes, I'm absolutely certain. Frank nodded slowly. Fair enough. For what it's worth, I always thought Robert underestimated you. After Frank left, I moved quickly. I called the bank in Savannah where I'd opened new accounts, confirming they were ready to receive the wire transfers. Then I packed 2 large suitcases with essentials. Clothes, jewelry, photographs, and sentimental items I couldn't bear to leave behind. I was just closing the second suitcase when my phone rang. Robert. "Where are you?" he demanded without preamble. "You were supposed to meet me at the church an hour ago." "I'm sorry," I said, infusing my voice with appropriate contrition. I wasn't feeling well. I came home to lie down. His tone softened slightly. "Are you okay? The kids will be here soon. Tom's flight landed 15 minutes ago. I'll be fine. Just need a little more rest. Why don't you bring them home? I'll have dinner ready." "All right," he agreed, sounding somewhat mollified. "We'll be there around 4:30. That gave me just over an hour before they arrived, and according to Frank, the Ferrari transport team would arrive around 5. I needed to create a diversion. I sent a quick text to Evie Martinez, my neighbor and friend of 20 years. Having a family crisis. If you see unusual activity at my house today, especially around the garage, please don't be alarmed. Evie's response came immediately. "Everything okay? Need help?" "Just dealing with some difficult truths," I replied. "I'll explain everything. Soon." Next, I called a local restaurant and ordered a large takeout order for pickup at 4:15. Lasagna, salad, garlic bread, enough to feed everyone. I'd tell Robert I ordered it because I wasn't feeling up to cooking. It would give me a reason to leave the house right when the transport team was due to arrive. At 4:05, I pulled the Shelby GT500 out of the garage and parked it down the street, hidden by a curve in the road but accessible when I needed it. Then I drove my everyday car, a practical Volvo SUV, to pick up the food. As I was paying for the order, my phone buzzed with a text from Frank. "Ferrari team 20 minutes out." Perfect timing. I loaded the food into the car and headed home, rehearsing my story. I'd act surprised when the transport team arrived, pretend to know nothing about it. With Tom and Becca there, Robert would have to contain his reaction. By Kateri, the time he figured out what was happening, the Ferrari would be gone. I pulled into our driveway just as another car arrived, Tom's rental. He stepped out, looking tired from his flight, but otherwise the same as always. My son, my firstborn, now a successful investment banker with a downtown apartment and a lifestyle. I barely understood. He waved when he saw me, coming over to help with the food. "Hey, Mom," he said, giving me an awkward side hug as I balanced the takeout containers. "Dad said you weren't feeling well. You okay?" "Just tired," I replied. "It's been a difficult few days." Tom nodded, his expression unreadable. "Dad told me about everything, the Jennifer situation. I'm sorry." I wondered exactly what everything entailed in Robert's version of events. "Are you? Sorry, I mean?" Tom looked startled by the question. "Of course. It's awful. For both of you. Both of us. As if we were equally responsible, equally affected." I bit back a sharp response. Now wasn't the time. We carried the food inside where Becca was already setting the table. She rushed over to hug me properly, holding on a beat longer than usual. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. "You look tired." "I am," I admitted. "But I'm glad you're both here." Robert emerged from his study, his expression carefully arranged into one of dignified grief. The bereaved brother, the concerned husband. It was a mask I'd seen him wear many times over the years. At funerals and hospital visits, whenever the situation called for sympathy rather than actual emotion. "Ellie," You should have let me pick up the food, he chided gently. You've been through enough today. I smiled thinly. It was no trouble. We were just settling at the table when the doorbell rang. Right on time. I'll get it, I said quickly, rising before anyone else could move. At the door stood two men in uniform, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Collins, we're here from Elite Auto. Transport to pick up the Ferrari Daytona Spider. I feigned confusion. I'm sorry, there must be some mistake. We're not expecting anyone. The lead transport worker checked his paperwork. This is the Collins residence, correct? We have documentation for a 1971 Ferrari 365 GTS 4 Daytona Spider, sold by Eleanor Collins to a buyer in Dubai. Behind me, I heard Robert's chair scrape against the floor as he stood up. What did you say? He appeared beside me, face flushed. There's definitely a mistake. That car isn't for sale. The transport worker looked uncomfortable but stood his ground. Sir, I have the signed transfer documents right here. The vehicle has been sold and we're authorized to transport it to our secure facility for shipping overseas. Robert snatched the clipboard, eyes widening as he scanned the document. His head snapped up, gaze locking with mine. Ellie, what have you done? I met his stare calmly. Exactly what the paperwork says, Robert. I sold the Ferrari. His face contorted with disbelief, then fury. You can't do that! That car is mine! Actually, I said quietly, it's titled in both our names. I have every legal right to sell it. Robert's mouth opened and closed, fish-like in his shock. Behind him, Tom and Becca had appeared in the hallway, watching the scene unfold with matching expressions of confusion. Dad? What's going on? Tom asked. Robert ignored him, still staring at me. This is insane. You know how much that car means to me. Call them off, Ellie. Cancel the sale. Now. I'm afraid that's not possible, I replied. The paperwork is signed. The money is in escrow. The car has been sold. The transport workers shifted uncomfortably, caught in our family drama. Sir, ma'am, we have a schedule to keep. If there's a dispute about ownership, you'll need to resolve it legally. Our instructions are to take possession of the vehicle today. Robert whirled on them. You're not taking my car anywhere. Get off my property before I call the police. Robert, I said softly, if you call the police, they'll simply confirm what I've told you. The car is legally sold. Making a scene won't change that. He turned back to me, voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Why are you doing this? Is this some kind of revenge? Because if it is, I promise you'll regret it. I smiled sadly. It's not revenge, Robert. It's self-preservation. Before he could respond, Tom stepped forward. Dad, maybe we should discuss this privately. Let's all go inside and— There's nothing to discuss, Robert snapped. Your mother has lost her mind. She's sold my Ferrari out from under me. Becca, always the peacemaker, tried next. Mom, Dad's really upset. Maybe you could reconsider. Call the buyer and explain there was a misunderstanding? I shook my head. No misunderstanding, Becca. The sale is final. The lead transport worker cleared his throat. So, the garage is where exactly? I'll show you, I offered, stepping outside and guiding them toward the detached structure. Robert followed, practically vibrating with rage. Ellie, I'm warning you. Stop this right now. I turned to face him, keeping my voice low enough that only he could hear. Like you stopped seeing Jennifer when I asked? Like you came home when your brother was dying? No, Robert, I don't think I will stop. I unlocked the garage and disarmed the security system, allowing the transport workers inside. Robert watched, helpless, as they carefully backed the Ferrari out. $2. $7 million of gleaming red Italian engineering, soon to be on its way to Dubai. You'll pay for this, he hissed, his handsome face ugly with rage. Everything you've done today, I'll make sure you regret it." I just nodded, watching as they loaded the Ferrari onto their specialized trailer. "I'm sure you'll try, Robert. You've always been very good at making others pay for your mistakes." Back inside, Tom and Becca waited in stunned silence. The lasagna forgotten on the dining table. I closed the front door behind me, bracing for the explosion I knew was coming. Robert didn't disappoint. "Your mother," he announced, voice shaking, "has just sold my Ferrari without my knowledge or consent. Apparently she's having some kind of breakdown." "It's not a breakdown," I corrected calmly. "It's a awakening." "Mom," Tom began carefully, "that car was worth millions. You can't just sell it on impulse because you're upset about Dad's situation." I turned to my son, studying his face, so like his father's, down to the slightly patronizing expression he wore when explaining things to women. "It wasn't an impulse, Tom. It was a carefully considered decision, just like your father's decision to spend the last 3 years traveling with Jennifer Parker while telling me he was on business trips." "That's different," Robert interjected. "Jennifer and I have a spiritual connection," I finished for him. "Yes, you mentioned that. Though I wonder if your spiritual connection would have been quite so powerful if Jennifer had been 57, with bad knees instead of 43 with perfect yoga poses." Becca made a choking sound that might have been suppressed laughter. Tom just looked uncomfortable. "This isn't helping," he said finally. "Look, we all need to calm down. Dad, maybe selling the Ferrari isn't the end of the world. Mom, I understand you're hurt, but there are better ways to handle this than selling Dad's cars." My eyebrows rose. "Cars? Plural? What makes you think I sold more than one?" The moment the words left my mouth, I regretted them. Robert's eyes, narrowed as understanding dawned. "What have you done, Ellie?" he demanded, voice dangerously quiet now. I straightened my spine, meeting his gaze directly. "The Corvette, Maserati, Porsche, and Jaguar have also been sold. The transport teams will be here tomorrow morning to collect them." The room went deathly silent. Even Becca, who had seemed almost amused by the Ferrari situation, looked shocked now. "Mom," she whispered, That's Dad's whole collection." "Not quite," I corrected. "I kept the Shelby. It was his first, after all. Seemed fitting that he should have something to remember the collection by." Robert's face had gone from red to white, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You vindictive bitch," he breathed. Tom stepped between us, facing his father. "Dad, don't. This isn't helping." "Helping?" Robert laughed bitterly. "Nothing's going to help this situation, Tom. Your mother has destroyed decades of careful collecting. Do you have any idea how long it took me to assemble those cars? The connections I had to make? The deals I had to negotiate?" "About as long as it took me to raise your children and build your business," I replied evenly. "Somehow you were willing to throw all that away without a second thought." Robert lunged forward only to be caught by Tom. "You think this is equivalent? You think selling my cars makes us even?" "No," I said quietly. "Nothing could make us even, Robert. But at least now I have options." "Options for what?" Becca asked, looking between us with growing alarm. I smiled at my daughter, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "Options for my new life. The one I'm going to build without your father." Robert struggled against Tom's restraining arm. "She's lost her mind. She needs help. Professional help." "Actually," I said, "what I need is dinner. The food's getting cold, and I, for one, am starving." I walked past them into the dining room and began serving myself lasagna, as if we were having a perfectly normal family meal. After a moment of shocked silence, Becca joined me, taking a plate, but not sitting down. "Mom," she said quietly, "are you really leaving Dad?" "No, Becca," I replied, taking a bite of lasagna. "Your father is leaving me, for Jennifer." All I'm doing is ensuring I have the resources to start over when he does. Tom appeared in the doorway, Robert no longer with him. Dad's gone to the garage. He needs some space. Understandable, I nodded. Finding out your prized possessions have been sold is quite a shock. Almost as shocking as discovering your spouse of 40 years has been living a double life. Tom ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like Robert's that it made my chest ache. Mom, I get that you're angry, but this seems extreme. I set down my fork, looking at my children, these adults I'd raised, who somehow still couldn't see what was right in front of them. Let me explain something, I said softly. Your father and I have a prenuptial agreement. If we divorce, I get a fixed settlement of $125,000 plus the house. Everything else, his business, his investments, his cars, remains his. Tom frowned. That can't be right. After 40 years, you'd be entitled to half of everything. Not according to the prenup I signed when I was 21, and your father was the only one with family money and potential, I replied. It was never updated, despite my years of contribution to his business and our family. But that's, Becca began. Unfair? Yes. Particularly since your father has spent the last 3 years systematically moving assets in preparation for leaving me for Jennifer. The only thing he couldn't easily hide was his car collection. Understanding finally dawned on Tom's face. So you sold the cars to ensure you'd have money after the divorce. Exactly, I nodded. When your father serves me with divorce papers, which I expect will happen very soon, I'll have the resources to fight for what I deserve after 40 years of marriage. Becca sat down heavily. You really believe Dad's been planning to leave you for years? In answer, I pulled out my phone and opened the folder of emails I'd downloaded from Robert's account. I passed it to her, watching as she scrolled through message after message between Robert and Jennifer, planning their trips, their future, their life after he left me. Her face crumpled as she read. Oh, Mom. I turned to Tom. Your father isn't the victim here. I am, and all I've done is level the playing field. The back door slammed, and Robert stormed back into the dining room, his face a mask of cold fury. You think you're clever, don't you? He said, ignoring the children and focusing entirely on me. You think you've won something here? I took another bite of lasagna, refusing to be intimidated. Not yet, but I'm no longer guaranteed to lose everything, which I suspect was your plan. I was going to be generous, Ellie, more than the prenup required. But now? He laughed bitterly. Now you'll be lucky if I don't contest the house. You're welcome to try, I replied calmly. But before you do, you might want to consider what a judge would make of these. I gestured to the phone in Becca's hand, still displaying his emails with Jennifer. Robert's eyes darted to the phone, then back to me, calculation replacing some of the rage. Those are private communications. You had no right to access them. And you had no right to betray our marriage vows, yet here we are. Tom cleared his throat. Maybe we should all take a step back. It's been an emotional day with Uncle Steve and everything. Let's not say things we'll regret. Robert ignored him, still glaring at me. This isn't over, Ellie. Not by a long shot. I set down my fork and dabbed my mouth with a napkin. Actually, Robert, I think it is. Tomorrow morning, the rest of your cars will be gone. By tomorrow evening, I'll have access to over $5 million that you can't touch. And by the end of the week, I'll be gone too, starting a new life without you. You can't just walk away, he sputtered. What about the house? What about Steve's funeral? I'll attend Steve's funeral, I assured him. He was kind to me when you weren't. As for the house, I shrugged. Keep it. I have no interest in living with ghosts. Robert stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. This woman who had defied him, who had dismantled his precious collection, who was refusing to play by his rules. For 40 years, I'd been predictable, dependable Ellie. Now I was someone else entirely. "Who are you?" he whispered, more bewildered than angry now. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I'm the woman who's finally putting herself first. Perhaps you should have paid more attention to her all along." The silence that followed my declaration hung heavy in the dining room. Robert stood frozen, his expression cycling through disbelief, rage, and something I'd rarely seen on his face: fear. Tom and Becca exchanged uncomfortable glances, caught between their parents in a way they'd never experienced before. "You can't be serious," Robert finally managed, his voice oddly hollow. "You're actually planning to leave?" I set my napkin beside my plate and stood. "Yes, Robert, just like you've been planning to leave me for Jennifer. The only difference is, I won't be leaving empty-handed." Becca's phone buzzed, breaking the tension. She glanced at it, then looked up with wide eyes. "It's Aunt Jen, Jennifer. She's asking if everything's okay because Dad isn't answering her texts." Robert lunged for the phone, but Becca pulled it away, her expression hardening. "She says she's worried about the situation with Eleanor." "Is that what I am to you now, Dad? A situation?" "Becca, you don't understand," Robert began, his tone shifting to the placating voice he used for difficult clients. "Jennifer is concerned about the family during this difficult time. She knows how close your uncle was to all of us." "Really?" Becca scrolled through the message. "Because she's asking if you've handled things with Mom yet, and whether you need her to come over for moral support." She looked up, anger flashing in her eyes. "She has a key to our house? Seriously?" Robert flushed. "It's not what you think. She's been helping with Steve's care when your mother needed a break." I laughed, the sound startling even to my own ears. "That's interesting, considering I've never met Jennifer in my life. She's certainly never set foot in this house while I've been here." Tom, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "Dad, just stop. We can all see the messages. We know what's been going on." Robert's shoulders slumped slightly, his carefully crafted narrative crumbling. "Fine. Yes, Jennifer and I have been seeing each other, but it's not some tawdry affair. We have a genuine connection. If you'd just meet her, you'd understand." "I don't want to meet my father's mistress," Becca interrupted. "And I definitely don't want her at Uncle Steve's funeral pretending to be part of this family." "She's going to be part of this family," Robert insisted. "Once your mother and I finalize our divorce." "Which could take quite a while now," I interjected smoothly. "Especially since I'll be contesting the prenuptial agreement on grounds of fraudulent financial disclosure and emotional duress." Robert's head snapped up. "You wouldn't." "I absolutely would. And with evidence that you've been systematically hiding assets in preparation for divorce, I might even win." Tom, ever the financial analyst, looked at me with newfound respect. "You've really thought this through, haven't you?" I nodded. "I've had approximately 24 hours to prepare for the rest of my life, Tom. I made good use of the time." Robert stalked to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a generous scotch, draining half of it in one swallow. "This is insane. You're punishing me for wanting to be happy." "No, Robert. I'm protecting myself from a man who was planning to discard me with nothing after 40 years of marriage." I turned to my children. "I'm sorry you've been dragged into this. It wasn't my intention to make you choose sides." "But that's exactly what you're doing," Robert accused. "Selling my cars, threatening legal action, all to turn them against me." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang again. We all froze, looking at each other. "Expecting someone?" Robert asked suspiciously. "No," I replied honestly. "Perhaps it's a neighbor paying respects for Steve." Tom went to answer the door, returning moments later with Evie Martinez, my neighbor and friend of 20 years. She took in the scene, Robert with his scotch, Becca clutching her phone, me standing defiantly by the table. and nodded as if confirming something to herself. "I saw the Ferrari being loaded onto a truck," she said without preamble. "Thought I should check if everything's all right." "Everything's fine, Evie," Robert said curtly. "Just a misunderstanding about a car." "Sale?" Evie raised an eyebrow, clearly not buying it. "Is that so?" Because from where I was standing, it looked like Eleanor was finally doing something for herself for once. Robert bristled. "This is a private family matter, Evie. We appreciate your concern, but—" "Actually," I interrupted, "I'm glad you're here. I was going to call you anyway." I walked over to Evie, linking my arm through hers. "Would you mind if I stayed with you tonight? I could use a friend right now." Evie squeezed my arm. "My guest room is all yours, honey, for as long as you need it." Robert set down his glass with a thud. "Now you're being ridiculous, Ellie. You don't need to stay with a neighbor. This is your home." "Not anymore," I replied quietly. "Not after today." Tom stepped forward. "Mom, you don't have to leave. I'll stay here with you if you're uncomfortable being alone with Dad." I smiled at my son, touched by his offer. "Thank you, Tom, but I've made my decision. I'll be back tomorrow to deal with the other cars and collect a few more things. After that," I shrugged. "We'll see." Becca stood, her expression torn. "Should I stay here or go with you?" "Stay," I told her. "Your father needs someone right now, and you need time to process everything. We'll talk tomorrow." Robert watched helplessly as I walked upstairs to gather an overnight bag, Evie trailing behind me. In our bedroom, the room we'd shared for decades, I quickly packed essentials, avoiding Robert's side of the closet entirely. "You really selling all his cars?" Evie asked, keeping her voice low. "All but one," I confirmed. "The Shelby, his first. I've already moved it down the street." Evie let out a low whistle. "Damn, Eleanor. After all these years of watching, you bend over backward for that man. I never thought you'd do something like this." "Neither did I admitted. But then, I never thought he'd be planning to leave me for his yoga instructor either." "The young thing with the braids? I've seen her car parked down the block a few times when you were at Steve's doctor appointments." Evie shook her head in disgust. Men never cease to amaze me with their predictability, trading in their wives just when they've given their best years. I zipped up my bag. Well, this wife isn't going quietly. When we returned downstairs, Robert was waiting at the bottom, his expression a curious mixture of anger and pleading. "Ellie, don't do this. Stay. We can talk about the cars, about everything. There's no need to involve the neighbors in our personal business." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the powerful, confident man I'd married, but a frightened boy caught in his own web of lies. For the first time since discovering his betrayal, I felt a flicker of pity. "Goodbye, Robert. I'll see you tomorrow." As Evie and I walked out, I heard Becca asking her father in a small, hurt voice, "How could you do this to Mom? To all of us?" I didn't wait to hear his answer. Evie's house was a warm, cluttered sanctuary 2 doors down from mine. Like me, she was in her 60s, widowed 5 years earlier when her husband Manuel died of a heart attack. Unlike me, she'd transformed her grief into a vibrant new chapter, filling her home with art, hosting neighborhood gatherings, even dating occasionally. She'd tried to pull me into her world many times, but I'd always been too busy caring for Robert's family, maintaining Robert's home. She showed me to her guest room, a cheerful space with floral curtains and a homemade quilt, then brought up a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "Figured you could use this," she said, pouring generously. "Now, tell me everything, and don't leave. Out a single detail." Over wine and then tea, I recounted the past 24 hours, discovering Robert's affair, finding the car documentation, planning my escape. Evie listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or murmuring in sympathy. "So what's next?" she asked when I'd finished. "After you sell the rest of the cars, Where will you go? Savannah, I replied without hesitation. I visited once, years ago. It felt like a place where I could start over. Savannah, Evie repeated, a smile spreading across her face. I can see that. Those beautiful squares, the Spanish moss, all that history. What will you do there? I stared into my teacup, suddenly uncertain. I don't know. I haven't thought that far ahead. I have a degree in architectural design that I never used. I suppose I could look into something related to that. You absolutely could, Evie agreed. You redesigned your entire kitchen 2 years ago, and it's gorgeous. Better than anything I've seen in those fancy magazines. I smiled, warmed by her confidence. That was just a hobby. Hobbies can become careers, especially at our age when we're not looking to climb corporate ladders anymore. Evie refilled our teacups. Manuel used to say life begins at 60. I didn't believe him until after he was gone, and I had to figure out who I was without him. And who was that? I asked. A woman who loves art galleries and spicy food and doesn't particularly enjoy keeping a spotless house. She grinned. Turns out, I'm much more interesting than I thought. I laughed, feeling a weight lift from my chest. I have no idea who I am without Robert. 40 years is a long time to be defined by someone else. All the more reason to find out, Evie said firmly. And $5 million isn't a bad cushion while you're figuring it out. My phone buzzed with a text from Frank Wilson. Ferrari delivered and inspected. Buyer extremely satisfied. Funds released to escrow. Will transfer to your account tomorrow morning. 1 car down, 4 to go. By this time tomorrow, I would have financial freedom for the first time in decades. That night, I slept better than I had in months, maybe years. No listening for Robert's breathing, no adjusting my position to avoid disturbing him. Just me in a comfortable bed, planning my future. Morning brought a flurry of texts from everyone. Robert demanding I come home immediately to discuss this. Madness. Tom asking if I was okay. Becca informing me that she'd decided to stay at a hotel rather than remain in the house with Robert and his drama. I responded only to the children, assuring them I was fine and would see them later. At 9:30, Frank called to confirm that the Seattle Museum's transport team would arrive at 10 down for the Porsche and Jaguar, and the Chicago buyers team at 1 down for the Corvette and Maserati. How do you want to handle this? He asked. Will you meet them at the house? Yes, I replied. I'll be there. Robert might make things difficult, Frank warned. After yesterday's scene with the Ferrari, let me worry about Robert. Just make sure the transport teams have all the necessary documentation. After a fortifying breakfast with Evie, I headed back to my soon-to-be former home. Robert's car was gone from the driveway, a small blessing. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, the dinner dishes from the previous night still on the table, lasagna congealed in its container. I went straight to the garage, confirming that the remaining 4 cars were still there, gleaming under their specialized lighting. Then I returned to the kitchen and began cleaning up, a lifetime habit too, ingrained to break even now. As I was loading the dishwasher, the front door opened, and Robert walked in. He looked terrible, unshaven, red-eyed, his normally immaculate clothing rumpled as if he'd slept in it, which I realized he probably had. You came back, he said, sounding almost surprised. I told you I would. The transport teams are coming for the other cars today. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. Ellie, you have to stop this. Those cars are my life's passion. My collection. You know what they mean to me. And you know what our marriage meant to me, I replied evenly. That didn't stop you from throwing it away. I made a mistake, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I got caught up in something. That felt exciting and new. But selling my cars won't fix anything. It will just ensure we can never move forward, never heal from this. I closed the dishwasher and turned to face him fully. I'm not trying to fix our marriage, Robert. I'm ensuring I have a future after you leave it. What if I don't want to leave? He asked, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. What if I end things with Jennifer? We go to counseling, try to rebuild what we had. For a moment, I almost believed him. Almost saw genuine remorse in his eyes. Then I remembered the emails, the plans he'd made, the systematic way he'd prepared to discard me. You don't want to stay because you love me, I said quietly. You want to stay because you love your cars more than you love Jennifer. The moment they're gone, you'll resent me even more than you already do. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. That's not true. I do love you, Ellie. In my way. We've built a life together. A life you were ready to abandon until yesterday. I shook my head. It's too late, Robert. The cars are sold. The money will be in my account. And our marriage is over. Before he could respond, the doorbell rang. The museum's transport team had arrived. Robert's expression hardened. I won't allow this. You don't have a choice, I reminded him. The cars are legally sold. I moved past him to answer the door, but he grabbed my arm, his grip tight. Enough to hurt. Don't do this, Ellie. I'm begging you. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. Not just anger or pride, but genuine terror at losing his prized possessions. In that moment, I realized Robert had never loved me the way he loved those cars. I was a practical acquisition, a helpmate, a status symbol in a different way. The cars were his passion. I pulled my arm free. It's already done. The next few hours passed in a blur of paperwork and barely contained emotion. Robert oscillated between threats and pleas, promising legal action one moment and reconciliation the next. I remained calm, signing where needed, ensuring each vehicle was properly documented before being loaded onto its specialized transport. The museum representatives were professionals, focused on the cars rather than the domestic drama unfolding around them. They examined the Porsche and Jaguar with reverent hands, commenting on their pristine condition, the impeccable maintenance, records Robert had kept. Your husband clearly loved these vehicles, one of them commented as they prepared to load the Jaguar. Yes, I agreed. He did. By noon, both cars were gone, and I had confirmation that the funds, $1 to $7 million, had been transferred to my new account in Savannah. Robert had retreated to his study, the door firmly closed, the occasional sound of breaking glass suggesting he was not handling the loss well. I took advantage of his absence to pack more of my belongings. Photo, albums, my mother's china, the few pieces of jewelry that held sentimental value. Most of our possessions I was content to leave behind. They represented a life I was rapidly leaving, tangible reminders of years spent placing Robert's needs above my own. At 12:45, Becca arrived, her expression grim. Dad called me. He's not doing well. I wouldn't expect him to be, I replied, closing my suitcase. He's losing something he truly loves. Becca winced. That's harsh, Mom. But true. Your father loved his cars, his status, his comfortable life with a wife who never questioned him. He's discovering that actions have consequences. She sat on the edge of the bed watching me pack. What about us? Me and Tom? Are we just collateral damage in whatever war you and Dad are fighting? I paused, turning to face my daughter. You're both adults with your own lives, Becca. This is between your father and me. It doesn't change how much I love you or how much he loves you. But it changes our family, she insisted. Everything will be different now. Everything was already different, I said gently. Your father made sure of that the moment he decided to build a life with Jennifer behind my back. I'm just refusing to be the only one who pays the price for his choices. Becca was quiet for a moment, then asked, Are you really moving to Savannah? Yes. I need a fresh start somewhere that doesn't hold memories of your father at every turn. That's so far away, she said, her voice small. Philadelphia to Savannah is what, 10 hours driving? About that. But there are planes, Becca, and phones. And I'll always come back to see you and Tom. I sat beside her, taking her hand. This isn't about leaving you. It's about finding myself after 40 years of being only Mrs. Robert Collins. The doorbell rang again. The Chicago buyers transport team arriving for the Corvette and Maserati. Becca followed me downstairs, hovering anxiously as I greeted them and led them to the garage. Robert emerged from his study, looking even worse than before. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling slightly. He'd clearly been drinking. "The Corvette, too?" he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Ellie, please, not the split window. I searched for years to find one in that condition." I hesitated, seeing the genuine pain in his eyes. For a moment, I considered relenting, letting him keep this one car that clearly meant so much to him. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Parker. "Robert says you're selling his cars out of spite. He's devastated. If you ever cared about him, you'd stop this cruelty." And just like that, my resolve hardened. I showed the text to Robert, whose face flushed with embarrassment. "Still claiming it's just a spiritual connection?" I asked coolly. He had no answer. The transport team loaded the Corvette and Maserati with efficiency, despite Robert's brooding presence. Once they were gone, the garage looked cavernous, empty except for the empty spaces where millions of dollars in automotive history had once resided. "It's done," I told Robert. "All the cars are sold except the Shelby." He looked at me with something like hatred. "Why did you keep the Shelby? To taunt me with the one car you didn't sell?" "No," I replied honestly. "I kept it because I'm going to drive it to Savannah. It seems fitting that I start my new life in the car that started your collection." His eyes widened in shock. "You're going to drive the Shelby? On actual roads? That car is worth over $1 million. And it was built to be driven, not displayed like a museum piece." I handed him a sealed envelope. "This contains my attorney's contact information. He'll be handling the divorce proceedings from my end. I've instructed him to be fair but firm." Robert took the envelope numbly. "You've really thought of everything, haven't you?" "I had to. You left me no choice." We stood in uncomfortable silence until Becca cleared her throat. "Mom, do you want me to help you pack anything else?" "Thank you, sweetheart, but I'm nearly done. Just a few more things from the kitchen and then I'll be ready to go." Robert followed us inside, watching as I carefully wrapped my grandmother's teapot and a few other cherished items. "When will you leave?" he asked. "Tomorrow morning," I replied. The funeral home called. "Steve's service is set for Monday. I'll stay through that, then head south." He nodded, seeming to accept the inevitability of my departure. "The kids will miss you. They know where to find me, and they're welcome any time." I closed the box of kitchen items and straightened. "I think that's everything I need for now. Becca, would you mind helping me carry these to Evie's?" As we gathered the last of my belongings, Robert remained in the kitchen, staring out the window at the empty garage. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. For the first time, I saw him clearly. Not as the powerful man I'd built my life around, but as a deeply flawed human who had taken for granted the one person who had stood by him through everything. "Goodbye, Robert," I said softly. "I'll see you at the funeral." He didn't turn around. "Goodbye, Ellie." Outside, Becca helped load my things into Evie's car. "You're really doing this," she marveled. "You're actually starting over at 63. "Better late than never," I replied, smiling at my daughter. Sometimes the hardest part is just taking that first step. As we drove away, I didn't look back at the house where I'd spent most of my adult life. Instead, I looked forward, toward a future I was finally free to shape. Back at Evie's, I spent the afternoon making arrangements, confirming my bank accounts in Savannah, researching places to stay until I found something permanent, mapping my route south. The Shelby, hidden down the street, would be my chariot to freedom, a poetic justice that wasn't lost on me. Frank called to confirm that all funds had been transferred successfully. "Just over $5 million, he said. "After taxes and my commission, you'll have around $4.5 million. Not a bad nest egg, Ellie." "No," I agreed. "Not bad at all. Thank you, Frank, for everything." "My pleasure. And for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing." Robert needed a wake-up call. "This isn't about waking him up," I clarified. "It's about waking myself up. For 40 years, I've lived Robert's life. Now I'm going to live my own." That evening, Tom came to see me, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Dad's a mess," he said without preamble. "He says you've destroyed him." I gestured for him to sit at Evie's kitchen table. "Your father is many things, Tom, but destroyed isn't one of them. He still has his business, his investments, and the Shelby. He'll rebuild his collection. He always bounces back." Tom fidgeted with a coaster. "He says you betrayed him, that he was planning to be generous in the divorce until you pulled this stunt." "And you believe him?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. Tom wouldn't meet my eyes. "I don't know what to believe anymore. Everything's happening so fast." I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. "I know this is difficult for you. Your father has always been your hero, and now you're seeing a side of him you never wanted to acknowledge. He's not perfect," Tom admitted reluctantly, "but selling his cars seems extreme. It was my only option if I wanted financial security. Your father has spent years hiding assets, Tom. He's been planning this divorce meticulously. If I had waited until he served me papers, I would have been left with almost nothing." Tom looked up, his expression troubled. "How do you know that? About him hiding assets?" I sighed, not wanting to drag my son deeper into our marital disputes, but needing him to understand. "Because I've seen the paperwork, Tom, the offshore accounts, the property in Jennifer's name that he paid for, the business investments that somehow never appear in our joint financial statements." "Dad wouldn't do that," Tom protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "Ask him," I suggested. "Ask him about the property in Sedona. Ask him about the account in the Cayman Islands. Ask him why our prenuptial agreement was never updated despite his promises to do so." Tom was silent, absorbing this information. Finally, he asked, "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I don't want you thinking I'm the villain in this story. Your father and I are both flawed people who made mistakes. The difference is, I owned mine. He tried to exploit his." Tom nodded slowly. "I need time to process all this." "Of course you do. And I'm not asking you to choose sides, Tom. I'm just asking you to consider that there might be more to this situation than your father's version of events." After Tom left, Evie emerged from her bedroom, where she'd tactfully retreated during our conversation. "How'd it go?" she asked. "As well as could be expected. Tom's loyal to his father, always has been. He'll come around," Evie assured me. "Once the dust settles, and he sees the whole picture." "Maybe," I said, not entirely convinced. "But even if he doesn't, I have to do what's right for me now. I've spent too many years worrying about what everyone else thinks." That night, I retrieved the key to the Shelby from my purse and held it in my palm, feeling its weight. Tomorrow, I would move the car to Evie's garage for safekeeping until after the funeral. Then, I would point it south and drive toward my new life. For the first time in decades, the future seemed wide open, full of possibilities rather than obligations. I was Eleanor Harlow again, not just Mrs. Robert Collins, and I was finally, truly free. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. What would I do with this freedom? Who would I become without Robert's shadow defining my boundaries? I didn't have all the answers yet, but I had time to find them, and for now, that was enough. The morning of Steve's funeral dawned with a heavy, gray sky, the threat of rain hanging in the air. I dressed carefully in a simple black dress with a single strand of pearls, elegant, understated, appropriate. As I fastened the clasp, I caught my reflection in Evie's guest room mirror. Something had changed in my face. The lines were the same, the silver-streaked hair pulled back in its usual style, but my eyes held a clarity, a purpose that had been missing for years. "You clean up nice," Evie commented from the doorway, already dressed in her own funeral attire. "Need a ride to the church?" I shook my head. "I'm taking the Shelby." Her eyebrows shot up. "You're driving that $1 million car to your brother-in-law's funeral? The day before you leave town forever?" "It seems fitting," I replied. Steve always loved that car. Said Robert should drive it more instead of just looking at it. Evie grinned. "Steve was a smart man, and he would have approved of what you're doing now." "I think so too," I agreed, reaching for my purse. "Thank you, Evie, for everything. These past few days would have been unbearable without you." She waved away my gratitude. "That's what friends are for. Now go make a grand entrance in that beautiful machine. Show them all who Eleanor Harlow really is." The Shelby started with a roar that vibrated through the seat and up my spine. The car was a beast, powerful, temperamental, demanding respect from its driver. Robert had always treated it like a fragile artifact, but I intended to drive it as it was meant to be driven. I pulled away from Evie's house and headed toward the church, acutely aware of the stares from neighbors as the distinctive rumble of the Shelby's engine announced my passage. I wondered if Robert had told people about our impending divorce yet, or if the community was still in the dark. Not that it mattered. I would be gone tomorrow. The church parking lot was already filling when I arrived. I chose a spot near the front, making no attempt to hide the car. Let them look. Let them talk. I was done caring what people thought. As I stepped out of the Shelby, smoothing my dress, I caught sight of Robert standing at the church steps with Tom and Becca. His head turned at the sound of the engine, his expression darkening when he saw me. He said something to the children, then strode toward me with purpose in his step. "What are you doing?" he demanded, keeping his voice low but intense. "Bringing that car here, today of all days?" I met his gaze steadily. Steve loved this car, Robert. He would have appreciated the gesture. "This isn't about Steve. It's about you making a statement, flaunting what you've taken from me. Think what you want," I replied, moving past him toward the church. "I'm here to honor your brother, not argue with you." Robert caught my arm, his fingers digging in slightly. "We need to talk after the service. About the divorce, about the cars, about all of it." "My attorney will be happy to schedule a meeting with yours," I said, extricating myself from his grip. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like to pay my respects to your brother." I walked away, feeling his glare boring into my back but refusing to give him the satisfaction of turning around. Tom and Becca watched our exchange with matching expressions of discomfort. I smiled at them as I approached. "You drove the Shelby," Tom said, his tone somewhere between impressed and concerned. "I did," I confirmed. "It handles beautifully." Becca glanced over my shoulder at Robert, who remained by the car. "Dad's really upset." "Your father has been upset since the moment he realized I wouldn't simply roll over and accept whatever crumbs he decided to leave me after 40 years of marriage," I replied, keeping my voice gentle but firm. "That's his problem, not mine." The church was filling quickly. Colleagues from Robert's insurance business, neighbors, extended family members. Steve had been well-liked, his easy manner and genuine kindness earning him friendships from all walks of life. I found myself wondering who would attend my funeral someday, Would anyone remember Eleanor Harlow as more than Robert Collins' compliant wife? Not if I had anything to say about it. The service was brief but moving. The pastor spoke of Steve's strength in facing illness, his unfailing humor even in his darkest moments. Robert delivered a eulogy that managed to sound both sincere and self-aggrandizing, emphasizing his own devotion to his brother while glossing over the fact that I had been Steve's primary caregiver for months. I sat in the front pew with Tom and Becca, Robert at the far end with an empty space between us that seemed to symbolize the gulf that had opened in our family. About halfway through the service, I became aware of a presence at the back of the church, a woman with caramel-colored hair twisted into a familiar braid. Jennifer Parker had arrived, dressed in tasteful black but unmistakable with her yoga-toned physique and serene expression. The audacity of it took my breath away. To come to Steve's funeral, to insert herself into this family moment when Steve had barely been gone a week. It spoke volumes about both her and Robert. This wasn't just an affair. This was a woman who fully expected to replace me, who was already positioning herself in my role. I felt Becca stiffen beside me as she too noticed Jennifer's presence. "You've got to be kidding me," she whispered. "Did Dad invite her?" "I would assume so," I replied softly. "Though it's possible she took it upon herself to come support him in his time of grief." Becca's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. The gesture surprised me. She had always been more her father's daughter than mine, more likely to side with him in family disagreements. This small act of solidarity meant more than she could know. As the service concluded and we moved to the Yossi cemetery for the interment, I noticed Jennifer hovering at the periphery of the group, her eyes fixed on Robert with an expression of practiced concern. She made no attempt to approach me or the children, maintaining a respectful distance while still clearly establishing her presence. At the graveside, Robert stood between Tom and Becca, his shoulders rigid as the pastor spoke the final prayers. I stood slightly apart, acutely aware of the community's curious glances, the whispered questions about why the grieving brother and his wife were separated by such obvious distance. When it was time to place flowers on the casket, I stepped forward with a single white rose. "Goodbye, Steve," I murmured. "Thank you for your kindness, for seeing me when no one else did." As I stepped back, I caught Robert watching me, an unreadable expression on his face. For a moment, our eyes met across the open grave, and I wondered if he was remembering the young couple we had once been, full of dreams, of plans, of love that we believed would withstand anything. Had he ever truly loved me, or had I always been a convenience, a support system for his ambitions? It didn't matter now. Whatever we had once been to each other had died long before this moment. After the service, a reception was held at the church hall. I circulated briefly, accepting condolences, ignoring the curious looks and whispered conversations that faltered as I approached. Everyone knew something was happening between Robert and me. The separate arrivals, the distance at the service, the obvious tension, but no one quite dared to ask directly. I was speaking with one of Steve's former colleagues when I felt a light touch on my arm. I turned to find Jennifer Parker standing beside me, a gentle smile fixed on her face. "Mrs. Collins," she said, her voice exactly as I'd imagined it, soft, melodious, practiced in its sincerity. "I'm Jennifer Parker. I just wanted to express my condolences for your loss. Steve was a wonderful man." The sheer nerve of it left me momentarily speechless. This woman, who had been sleeping with my husband for 3 years, who had participated in plans to discard me after 40 years of marriage, was offering me condolences as if we were casual acquaintances. "How would you know?" I asked finally, my voice cool but steady. "You never met Steve." Jennifer's smile faltered slightly. "Robert spoke of him often. I feel like I knew him through Robert's stories." "How fascinating," I replied. "And did Robert also tell you stories about me?" During your spiritual sessions? Did he mention his wife of 40 years while you were finding your balance together on those red rocks in Sedona? Her composure slipped further, a flush creeping up her neck. Mrs. Collins, Eleanor, I understand you're hurt and angry. That's natural. But Robert and I share something profound, a connection that transcends conventional relationships. I never intended to cause pain. I studied her face, the smooth skin, the practiced expression of empathy, the calculated vulnerability. In her eyes, she was good, I had to give her that. She'd had Robert wrapped around her finger for 3 years, convinced him to risk everything for the promise of a more exciting, more spiritual, more fulfilling life with her. Jennifer, I said, my voice softening as if confiding in her, let me share something with you. Robert has a pattern. When we met, I was the exciting young prospect, the woman who made him feel seen and understood. He pursued me relentlessly, promised me the world. Now, 40 years later, he's making you the same promises. The difference is, I was 21 and didn't know any better. What's your excuse? Before she could respond, I continued, but perhaps, the most important thing you should know is this. Robert Collins is now essentially broke. Those cars you admired and all those Instagram photos, gone, sold. The money, in accounts he can't access. The prenup he counted on to protect his assets, being challenged as we speak. So while I wish you every happiness in your spiritual journey together, I suggest you temper your expectations about the material comforts that journey will include. Jennifer's eyes widened, her practiced serenity completely abandoned. You're lying. Robert would have told me if... Would he? I interrupted gently. Robert tells people what they need to hear to get what he wants. I learned that lesson the hard way. It seems you're about to learn it too. I patted her arm lightly and moved away, leaving her standing there with her mouth slightly open, the perfect picture of dawning realization. It was petty, perhaps, but deeply satisfying. I was making my way toward the exit when Robert intercepted me, his expression thunderous. What did you say to Jennifer? She looks like she's seen a ghost. Just offering some friendly advice from one woman to another, I replied, sharing my experience of life with Robert Collins. His jaw tightened. You had no right to speak to her at all. And she had no right to come to your brother's funeral, yet here we are. I glanced around the crowded reception. Is this really where you want to have this conversation, Robert? With everyone watching? He seemed to become aware of the curious eyes turning our way and took a step back. Fine. But this isn't over, Ellie. Far from it. Actually, it is, I said quietly. Our marriage is over. Your car collection is over. The only thing left is the legal formalities, and those will be handled by our attorneys. I smoothed my dress, maintaining my composure. Now, I'm going to say goodbye to our children and leave. You should get back to Jennifer. She looks like she could use some reassurance. I found Becca and Tom near the refreshment table, both watching the interaction between Jennifer and Robert with fascination. Jennifer appeared to be asking urgent questions, her usual grace replaced by agitated gestures. Robert was attempting to calm her, his own composure slipping. What did you say to her? Becca asked, not bothering to hide her curiosity. Just the truth, I replied. Something she should have considered before coming to a family funeral. Tom shook his head, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. Mom, I've never seen this side of you before. It's been there all along, I told him, just buried under 40 years of being the perfect wife. I hugged them both, promising to call when I reached Savannah, assuring them that they could visit any time. As I was about to leave, Tom pulled me aside. I asked Dad about those accounts you mentioned, he said quietly. The property in Sedona, the offshore stuff. He denied it at first, but when I pressed him, he trailed off, looking troubled. He admitted it? I asked, surprised. Tom nodded. Not in so many words, but he got angry, defensive. Said I had no right to question how he managed his finances. That's when I knew you were telling the truth. He squeezed my hand. I'm sorry, Mom, for doubting you. You don't need to apologize, I assured him. Your father has always been convincing. It's what made him successful in business, in life. And he's still your father, Tom. That doesn't change, regardless of what's happened between us. As I walked out to the parking lot, the Shelby gleaming in the afternoon sun, I felt a curious lightness. The funeral had been the last obligation tying me to this place, to my old life. Tomorrow, I would point this powerful machine south and begin the next chapter. I was just unlocking the car door when a voice called my name. I turned to find Robert's brother-in-law, Marcus, approaching. He had been married to Robert's sister, Catherine, for 30 years before her death from cancer. 5 years earlier. Eleanor, he said, reaching for my hand. I've been hoping to speak with you. Marcus, I smiled, genuinely pleased to see him. Unlike most of Robert's family, Marcus had always been kind, treating me as an equal rather than an accessory. It's good to see you, despite the circumstances. He nodded solemnly. Steve was one of the good ones. And from what I hear, you took excellent care of him at the end. That couldn't have been easy. It wasn't, I acknowledged. But he deserved dignity in his final days. Marcus glanced back at the church, then lowered his voice. Words getting around about you and Robert. The cars, the other situation. He looked uncomfortable but pressed on. Catherine always said you were the best thing that ever happened to Robert, that he didn't deserve you. I think she was right. I was touched by this unexpected support. Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot. Are the rumors true? You're leaving town? Tomorrow, I confirmed. I'm starting over in Savannah. He nodded thoughtfully. Good for you. It's never too late to build the life you deserve. He hesitated, then added, Robert's telling people you had some kind of breakdown, that you acted irrationally, vindictively. I laughed softly. Of course he is. Robert has always been skilled at shaping narratives to suit his purposes. Not everyone's buying it, Marcus assured me. Those of us who've known you both for years, we see the truth. And we're on your side, Eleanor. His words warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. I had been so focused on my escape, on securing my financial future, that I hadn't considered the community I was leaving behind. The friends who had seen me as more than just Robert's wife. Thank you, I said again, squeezing his hand. Please, stay in touch. I'd like that. As Marcus walked away, I noticed a small gathering forming near the church entrance. Jennifer, Robert, and what appeared to be her parents, an older couple dressed formally in funeral attire. The body language was tense. The conversation animated despite their attempts at discretion. Jennifer's father seemed to be lecturing Robert, who was responding with placating gestures that I recognized all too well. I smiled to myself as I slid into the Shelby's driver's seat. It seemed Jennifer's parents were not entirely thrilled with their daughter's choice of partner, especially now that certain financial realities were coming to light. Robert would charm them eventually, he always did, but for now he was facing a reckoning on multiple fronts. I started the engine, enjoying the visceral rumble that vibrated through the steering wheel. As I pulled away from the church, I caught a glimpse of Robert in the rearview mirror, watching me leave with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Anger? Regret? Perhaps a bit of both. It didn't matter anymore. The tie that had bound us for 40 years was severed, and I was free. Back at Evie's house, I finished packing for tomorrow's journey. My life had been distilled down to what would fit in the Shelby's limited trunk space and a small box of precious items I was shipping ahead to a temporary address in Savannah. It was remarkable how little I truly needed from 4 decades of accumulated possessions. How was the funeral? Evie asked as she helped me organize my things. Illuminating, I replied. Jennifer made an appearance. Evie's eyebrows shot. Up. The yoga instructor? At her lover's brother's funeral? That takes nerve. She has plenty of that, I agreed, though considerably less after our brief conversation. I recounted my exchange with Jennifer, then the subsequent drama with Robert and her parents. Evie cackled with delight. Eleanor Harlow, you are a force of nature. I wish I could have seen her face when you told her Robert was broke. It was satisfying, I admitted, though perhaps not my finest moment. Nonsense, Evie dismissed. After what they put you through, a little comeuppance is the least they deserve. We were interrupted by a knock at the door. Evie went to answer it, returning moments later with an uncomfortable-looking Tom. Mom, he said, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Dad wants to see you. One last time before you leave. I folded the blouse I was holding and placed it carefully in my suitcase. I have nothing more to say to your father, Tom. Anything he needs to communicate can go through our attorneys. He says it's important. About Steve. Tom ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it made my chest ache. He's outside in his car. I sighed, torn between curiosity and the desire to maintain the clean break I'd established. What about Steve? I don't know, he wouldn't tell me. Just said he needed to speak with you privately. Evie touched my arm. You don't have to go, Eleanor. He's probably just trying to manipulate you again. Probably, I agreed. But if it's truly about Steve, I should hear him out. I turned to Tom. Tell your father I'll meet him at the park down the street. Neutral territory. After Tom left, Evie gave me a concerned look. Want me to come with you? I could lurk behind a tree, jump out if he tries anything. I laughed at the image. I appreciate the offer, but I'll be fine. Robert may be many things, but he's not physically dangerous. Just emotionally manipulative. Which can be worse, Evie pointed out. Be careful, Eleanor. Don't let him get inside your head again. The park was quiet in the late afternoon. Just a few mothers with young children at the playground area. Robert's Mercedes was parked near the entrance, and he sat on a bench overlooking the small pond where generations of neighborhood children had sailed toy boats and fed ducks. He stood as I approached, his expression guarded but lacking the anger I'd seen earlier. Thank you for coming, he said formally. Tom said you wanted to discuss Steve, I replied, remaining standing to maintain the psychological advantage of height. What about him? Robert gestured to the bench. Please sit. This won't take long. I hesitated, then sat at the far end of the bench, maintaining distance between us. I'm listening. Robert reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an E envelope. Before Steve died, he asked me to give you this. I forgot until today when I was going through his things. I took the envelope skeptically. Why would Steve give you something for me instead of giving it to me directly? I was with him every day. He gave it to me the last time we were alone together, Robert explained. About a week before he died. You were picking up his prescriptions. He made me promise to give it to you. After. The envelope was sealed, my name written on the front in Steve's shaky handwriting. It felt substantial, containing more than just a note. Open it, Robert urged, an odd note in his voice. I studied his face, trying to discern if this was some kind of trick. But his expression held none of the calculation I'd learned to recognize over the years, just a weariness that seemed to have settled into the lines around his eyes. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a folded letter and what appeared to be a legal document. I read the letter first. Dear Eleanor, it began in Steve's familiar scrawl. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're facing the aftermath of what I suspect is coming. Robert thinks I don't know about Jennifer, about his plans, but Brothers sense these things. I've watched you care for me with kindness and dignity these past months. While he could barely stand to be in the same room with illness, you deserve better than what he's planning for you. Enclosed is the deed to my cabin in northern Michigan. It's not much, just a small place on a quiet lake, but it's paid for, and it's now yours. I've had the deed transferred to your name, alone. Robert doesn't know. Consider it my way of ensuring you have a place that's truly yours, whatever happens next. You've been a better sister to me than he's been a brother. I only wish I could do more. With love and gratitude, Steve. I stared at the deed in disbelief. Steve's cabin, a charming 2-bedroom structure on a small lake near Traverse City. He'd bought it 20 years ago as a fishing retreat, a place to escape the pressures of his corporate job. I'd visited once, years ago, and had been enchanted by its rustic simplicity, its perfect placement among towering pines with a view of crystal-clear water. "Did you read this?" I asked Robert, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes," after I opened it. "You opened my letter?" Anger flared, quick and hot. "I needed to know what he'd given you," Robert admitted, not bothering to deny it. "I didn't expect that." I carefully refolded the letter and deed, returning them to the envelope. "Why are you giving this to me now? You could have hidden it, claimed you never received it." Robert was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the pond. "Because Steve would have wanted you to have it," he said finally. "And because maybe you deserve something that's just yours, after everything." I studied him, trying to reconcile this moment of apparent decency with the man who had been planning to discard me with a pittance after 40 years. Is this supposed to make me change my mind? Return your cars? Cancel my plans? He shook his head. "No, it's too late for that. The cars are gone, except the Shelby. You're leaving tomorrow. Our marriage is over." He turned to face me fully. "But I wanted you to know that not everyone in my family undervalued you. Steve saw what I couldn't, or wouldn't." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. For a moment, I glimpsed the man I had once loved, capable of insight, of genuine feeling beneath the calculated exterior. But it was too little, too late. "Thank you for giving me the letter," I said, rising from the bench. "It means a lot to have something from Steve." Robert stood as well, maintaining the distance between us. "What will you do? Still go to Savannah?" "Yes," I confirmed. "But perhaps I'll spend some time at the cabin, too. It would be nice to have a summer retreat." He nodded, hands shoved in his pockets like a chastened schoolboy. "Ellie, I know it doesn't matter now, but I am sorry. Not just for Jennifer, but for taking you for granted, for forgetting what we built together." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the powerful businessman who had dominated my life for decades, but an aging man facing the consequences of his choices. In that moment, I felt neither anger nor vindication, just a profound sadness for what might have been. "Goodbye, Robert," I said quietly. "I hope you find what you're looking for." I walked away without looking back, the envelope clutched tightly in my hand. Steve's final gift wasn't just a cabin, it was validation. Proof that someone had seen my worth when the person who should have valued me most had failed to do so. As I made my way back to Evie's house, I realized something profound had shifted within me. The anger that had fueled me these past days had begun to dissipate, replaced by a sense of purpose unconnected to Robert or our marriage. I wasn't just running away from a broken relationship. I was moving toward a life of my own choosing. Tomorrow, I would drive the Shelby south to Savannah, where a new chapter awaited. And someday, when the time was right, I would head north to a cabin by a lake, a place that belonged to me alone, Steve's final act of kindness. The future stretched before me, not as a void to be feared, but as a canvas waiting to be filled with my own choices, my own adventures, my own definition of happiness. For the first time in 40 years, I was truly free. The Shelby handled beautifully on the open highway, its power thrumming beneath me as I crossed from Pennsylvania into Maryland. I had left Oakwood just after dawn, my goodbyes to Evie tearful, but brief. She had promised to visit Savannah in the fall, when the summer heat had dissipated and the historic squares were framed by autumn colors. "Don't look back," she had advised, pressing a small package into my hands. Not even once. Now, 4 hours into my journey, I opened her gift at a rest stop in Maryland. A journal bound in soft leather with my initials embossed on the cover. Inside, she had written on the first page, "The rest is unwritten. Make it magnificent. Love, Evie." I traced the words with my fingertip, grateful for this friend who had appeared exactly when I needed her most. Then I returned to the Shelby, continuing my journey south. By nightfall, I had reached Richmond, Virginia, where I checked into a boutique hotel downtown. After 40 years of pinching pennies while Robert spent freely, it felt deliciously indulgent to book a luxury suite without consulting anyone. I ordered room service, a bottle of champagne, and sat by the window watching the city lights while savoring every sip. My phone buzzed occasionally. Texts from Tom confirming I was safe, from Becca sending love, from Evie asking how the Shelby was performing. Nothing from Robert. The divorce papers had been filed the day after the funeral, my attorney moving with the swift efficiency I had requested. Tomorrow I would complete the drive to Savannah, where a furnished apartment awaited me. A short-term rental while I explored the city and decided where I wanted to settle permanently. My new bank accounts were established, my financial future secure thanks to the sale of Robert's beloved cars. The thought still brought a smile to my face. Not out of vindictiveness, but from the satisfaction of having taken control of my destiny, at last. Morning brought clear skies and open roads. I drove with the windows down, letting the air tousle my hair, feeling younger than I had in decades. The Shelby attracted attention at every gas station, appreciative glances from car enthusiasts, questions about its history, compliments on its condition. "Beautiful car," a middle-aged man commented at a station just outside of Savannah. 67. "Shelby, right? Don't see many of these on the actual road." "That's the tragedy," I replied, patting the gleaming hood. "They were built to be driven." He nodded in agreement. "Your husband must really trust you with his baby." I smiled, sliding back behind the wheel. It's my baby now. By late afternoon, I crossed the Talmadge Memorial Bridge into Savannah, the city spreading below me in a tapestry of green squares and historic buildings. Something lifted in my chest at the sight, a sense of possibility, of homecoming to a place I'd barely visited but somehow recognized in my soul. My apartment was in a converted cotton warehouse overlooking the Savannah River, its brick walls and tall windows preserving the character of the original structure while offering modern luxury. The leasing agent met me in the lobby, her eyebrows raising slightly when I pulled up in the Shelby. "Mrs. Collins? Or should I say Ms. Harlow?" she asked, extending her hand. "Ms. Harlow," I confirmed, enjoying the sound of my reclaimed name. "But please, call me Eleanor." She handed me the keys with a smile. "Welcome to Savannah, Eleanor. I think you're going to love it here." The apartment was everything I had hoped for, spacious yet intimate, with high ceilings, exposed brick, and a balcony overlooking the river. I wandered from room to room, tracing my fingers along countertops, opening and closing cabinets, imagining my life in this new space. For dinner, I ventured out to a nearby restaurant, dining alone on the patio with a glass of wine and a plate of shrimp and grits. The waiter was attentive without being intrusive, the other diners engaged in their own conversations, nobody questioning why a woman in her 60s would be dining alone. I felt invisible in the most liberating way, not overlooked or dismissed, as I had often felt in Oakwood, but simply allowed to exist on my own terms, without explanation or apology. Back at the apartment, I unpacked the few personal items I had brought with me. Family photos carefully edited to exclude Robert, my grandmother's teapot, the journal from Evie. Everything else I would acquire new, creating a home that reflected only my taste, my preferences. I stood on the balcony, watching boats navigate the river below, lights twinkling on the opposite shore. Tomorrow, I would begin exploring Savannah properly, familiarizing myself with its streets and squares, its shops and galleries. Perhaps I would visit the Savannah College of Art and Design, investigate their continuing education programs in architectural design. For the first time in decades, my calendar was gloriously empty, every day a blank page waiting to be filled. According to my whims alone, 2 weeks passed in a blur of discovery. I walked Savannah's historic districts until I knew them by heart, visited every museum, took a cooking class focused on Southern cuisine, and attended a lecture series on architectural preservation. I made acquaintances at my favorite coffee shop, struck up conversations with fellow gallery goers, exchanged phone numbers with a group of women I met during a guided tour of historic homes. Small steps toward building a new community, a new identity. 1 month after arriving in Savannah, I received a large envelope from my attorney. Inside were the finalized divorce papers, signed by Robert and approved by the court. Our 40-year marriage was officially dissolved, with terms far more favorable than the original prenuptial agreement would have allowed. I had won not only my freedom but financial independence that would support me for the rest of my life. That evening, I drove the Shelby to Tybee Island, parking near the beach as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. I walked barefoot in the sand, the warm Atlantic lapping at my ankles, my shoes dangling from one hand and the divorce papers from the other. At the water's edge, I stood watching the sky transform from blue to gold to fiery orange. 40 years of my life had been defined by one man, one marriage, one narrow set of expectations. Now, at 63, I was starting over with decades, potentially still ahead of me. What would I do with this unexpected freedom? Who would I become now that I was neither wife nor caretaker nor supporter of someone else's dreams? The possibilities stretched before me like the vast ocean, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I looked down at the divorce papers in my hand, the legal testament to a life ended and a life begun. For a moment, I considered a dramatic gesture, tearing them to pieces, casting them into the waves. But that felt too melodramatic, too tied to the past I was leaving behind. Instead, I carefully folded them and placed them back in their envelope. I would file them away, a closed chapter rather than a defining narrative. As the last light faded from the sky, I made my way back to the Shelby, sand still clinging to my feet, salt spray in my hair. I felt lighter somehow, unburdened not just by the weight of my failed marriage, but by the expectations I had carried for so long. 3 months after settling in Savannah, I enrolled in a certificate program in historic preservation at SCAD. My first project involved documenting architectural details in one of Savannah's oldest neighborhoods, the very elements that had captivated me on my first visit years ago. 6 months in, I joined the board of a local foundation dedicated to restoring historic homes for use as transitional housing for women starting over after difficult circumstances. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was helping create safe spaces for women in transition while navigating my own metamorphosis. A year after leaving Oakwood, I purchased a small but elegant townhouse in Savannah's historic district, its gracious proportions and aged brick walls speaking to my designer's soul. I renovated it myself, working alongside contractors, making every decision from paint colors to cabinet hardware, without seeking anyone else's approval. Tom visited that spring, marveling at the transformation he saw not just in my home, but in me. "You seem different, Mom," he observed as we strolled through Forsyth Park. Younger somehow. Not younger, I corrected with a smile. Just more myself. Becca came in the summer, bringing her new boyfriend, staying for a week of sightseeing and late-night conversations on my rooftop garden. On their last evening, as we shared a bottle of wine under the stars, she confided that her father's relationship with Jennifer had ended just months after I left. She expected a certain lifestyle, Becca explained. When the reality of Dad's financial situation became clear, she suddenly found their spiritual connection wasn't quite as strong. I felt a momentary pang of sympathy for Robert, quickly, replaced by the recognition that he was finally facing the consequences of his own choices. "And how is he now?" I asked, more out of curiosity than concern. "Managing," Becca replied. "The insurance business is doing well enough. He's seeing someone new, age-appropriate this time, but he's different. Humbled, I think." I nodded, realizing I felt nothing but a distant compassion for the man who had once been the center of my world. Robert belonged to my past, a closed chapter in the story of my life. 2 years after leaving Oakwood, I drove the Shelby north to Michigan to visit Steve's cabin for the first time since it became mine. The place was exactly as I remembered, peaceful, rustic, surrounded by towering pines with a perfect view of the lake. I spent a month there, swimming in the clear water each morning, reading on the porch in the afternoons, falling asleep to the sound of loons calling across the lake. I met the neighbors, joined in community potlucks, found myself welcomed into the tight-knit seasonal community. On my last evening, I sat on the dock watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. A loon called in the distance, its haunting cry echoing across the still surface. In that moment, I felt a profound gratitude for Steve's final gift, for the courage I had found, for the life I was building day by day on my own terms. I thought of the woman I had been 3 years earlier, trapped in a marriage that had become a prison, valued only for what I could provide, preparing to be discarded after a lifetime of devotion. I barely recognized her now. In her place stood Eleanor Harlow, independent, confident, surrounded by new friends and possibilities, financially secure thanks to a collection of cars whose value Robert had recognized, but whose potential I had fully realized. I smiled at the perfect symmetry of it all. After 40 years together, he had left for his yoga instructor, and I had left with his rare car collection, not as an act of revenge, but as the key that unlocked the door to my true self. As the last light faded from the sky, I made a silent promise to the woman I had become. The best was yet to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.